Good morning, everyone, and morning. And we all know what this is, the 84th anniversary and observance of Pearl Harbor. And we welcome you to the National Museum of the Pacific War. Thank you to Lauren Dollar and the crew getting us together and everything like that. So we'll proceed with our program.
This is John Daly speaking from the CBS newsroom in New York. Here is the Far East situation as reported to this moment. The Japanese have attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and our defense facilities at Manila, capital of the Philippines.
It is hard to believe that there was a time when television did not exist, and John Daly interrupted the New York Philharmonic broadcast with his earth-shattering announcement on December 7th, 1941. And I'm hoping that as the years go on and our veterans have passed, that we will not forget this day. It just does not become just a day on the calendar, but a significant one, December 7th.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
We are most fortunate today that history has allowed us to embrace this famous living figure in living color. Typically, you see it in black and white. How epic were FDR's words, for in 33 minutes after the resounding conclusion of his speech, Congress unanimously voted to declare war upon Japan. For those of a younger generation in the audience, one never knows when something might trigger a lifelong interest. That happened to me in 1957 when I was in third grade, and I read this book about Pearl Harbor. As a matter of fact, I still own it to this day. It's a very popular series at that time. Also, I built a model of the USS Arizona as a youngster as well. So I am Gary Lane, World War II historian, pictured here at the Visitor Center at Pearl Harbor, and portrayed here also is the remaining mast from the USS Arizona at the Phoenix Capitol Mall in Arizona. I might add that I'm proud to say that Board of Directors Bay Area Honor Flight, we have one of our former, or our founders here visiting us from San Antonio, and I'm going to say too, I have a lot of friends in the audience today, so I feel like I have a home field advantage, so thank you. And a special thank you to the National Museum of the Pacific War for allowing me to present my material today and on this memorable day in American history. Today I will discuss the USS Arizona, two of the last survivors of this famous battleship, and a mention of FDR's Declaration of War speech on the 7th. World War II was truly the first global conflict embracing several theaters. Ironically, the aggressors or losers killed more victims than the victors did. For the first time, more civilians were murdered than military personnel. Here we see a Polish woman grieving over her dying mother. 25 to 36 million deaths occurred in the Pacific, combined with 44 million in Europe, resulting in 75 to 80 million tragic losses of life, representing 3% of the global population. Pictured here is a young Marine casualty at the Battle of Tarawa. As we say, he will forever be 19 years of age. Alfred Thayer's epic book influenced the world's naval powers, including the United States, as it embarked on a battleship construction program in the early 20th century. In less than 40 years, the use of the battle wagon would be replaced by the aircraft carrier in World War II. I might add that the Imperial Japanese Navy was the largest navy at the start of World War II and based its development on the Royal British Navy. From 1913 to 1920, Franklin Delano Roosevelt served as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and here he is pictured at the laying of the keel of the fateful USS Arizona on March 16, 1944, at the Brooklyn Naval Shipyard. Ironically, the Arizona never fired its 14-inch guns in battle. And here's a schematic of the USS Arizona. Its firepower was characterized by 4 turrets, 2 aft, 2 fore, 3 14-inch guns which could fire a shell almost 12 miles. On December 6th, the ship took on 1.5 million gallons of bunker fuel oil for a possible West Coast trip, and 1 million pounds of smokeless gunpowder was stored in the 6 forward powder rooms. So essentially, it was a floating bomb, and the weight of that ship was about 31,400 tons. Typically, battleships were named after states. At the University of Arizona in Tucson, in the student quad, the design of the ship is configured in an exact outline of crushed rocks. So when you're there and you look at the bow portion, clear out to that building where the stern is, it gives you an impression of how big that ship really was. So from bow to stern, it is 605 feet, and the amidships is about 97 feet. There's also a small museum and ship's bell as well on the campus at the University of Arizona. Further tribute to the USS Arizona is the Memorial Gardens at Salt River, Arizona. Here you can see 1,512 commemorative columns outlining the ship's perimeter. Each illuminated column signifies those that perished on December 7th, 1941, and unlit those who survived. And ironically, there were 300 plus that were on Liberty in Honolulu that were not on the ship on the day of the attack, and consequently their lives were saved. So on this schematic here, here's where 1.5 million gallons of bunker fuel oil was stored in the hull. Today, 2 quarts of oil leak out of the sunken ruins of the ship every 24 hours. And they called that the Tears of the Arizona. So this is what one of the 4 turrets resembles in its 14-inch guns. The powder and projectile were elevated by hoist to the breech, which was loaded and locked prior to firing. Turret number 1 remains sunken with the Arizona. However, the gun at turret number 2 was restored and transferred to the USS Nevada, which saw action in both the European and Pacific theaters. And the Nevada was at D-Day and at Pearl Harbor, the only ship to do so, and then also was at Iwo and Okinawa as well. Later, it was sunk part of atomic testing in 1946 at Bikini Atoll. This book describes the number of brothers serving on the Arizona on December 7th. There were 79 brothers on board, unbelievable, with 63 perishing. Only 4 were identified and recovered. 1,177 sailors and Marines lost their lives in 7 seconds. If 9/11 had never occurred, it is quite possible that Pearl Harbor could be the greatest disaster in American history. Between 900 to 1,100 personnel remain entombed on the Arizona today. The last to be buried on that ship or entombed was Lauren Bruner, and Lauren Bruner was the second to last off the ship that day. 2 twists of fate, and this is not brought up very often. On October 22nd, 1941, during joint exercises at sea, Division I, which consisted of battleships Oklahoma, Nevada, and the Arizona, the Oklahoma missed a 90-degree turn, and so it rammed the Arizona on the port side, creating a large V-shaped hole in the ship, necessitating sending it to dry dock for repairs at Pearl Harbor, delaying its departure to the West Coast, hence its presence at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. The second incident, on December 4th, 1941, off the Hawaii coast, the Arizona was participating in a night firing exercise. They received orders to return to Pearl Harbor on December 5th instead of the 8th as originally planned. Hence, if the fates had been kind to the Arizona, she might never have been in port on December 7th, 1941, presumably. At 8:06 a.m. Hawaiian time, a Kate, which was really the bomber that did the most damage at Pearl Harbor, the Val and the Zero also contributed, but it was a mid-level bomber, so it had to fly at about 10,000 feet. If it went above that, whatever arsenal they dropped would go right through the ship's hull. If it was less than that, it would just bounce off. So they really had to make sure their coordinates were on it 10,000 feet, and this was 10,480. So they dropped a 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb, which penetrated through 4 decks and on the starboard side of turret number 2. The Arizona had already been hit by 3 bombs, 2 which were basically on the starboard and the port side in the water, and then another which bounced off the 3rd turret on the starboard side. So ultimately, it ignited powder magazines, which triggered a chain reaction to the fuel tanks. So remember, we had powder magazines and the fuel tanks there. So what you can see here is the armor-piercing bomb. And the bow separated, when that hit, the bow separated from the hull and jackknifed up to 40 to 50 feet, while air and smoke went up about 600 feet. Both sides of the bow section were blown out, and there was a tremendous fire that went from the Arizona over to the Vestal. The Vestal was a repair ship doing some work on the Arizona, which, by the way, is the most decorated non-combat ship in the history of the United States Navy. Those flames went over to the Vestal and then were sucked back in to the abyss of the doomed Arizona, putting the fire out on the Vestal. In 7 to 10 seconds, as I said, 1,177 men were incinerated. The Arizona sank in 9 minutes and 45 feet of water, so Pearl Harbor is not very, very deep. Fires burned over 3 days. Unfortunately, she was one of the 3 ships that could not be salvaged from the attack. There were 24 ships that were sunk that day. 21 were resurrected to fight again. The 3 that didn't make it, the Arizona, the Oklahoma, and the Utah. And the Utah remains a memorial at Pearl Harbor to this day. And the Oklahoma was salvaged, but it was being transported to the West Coast in 1946 and was sunk in a severe storm. And I just talked this morning to a survivor of the USS Colorado, who was part of that convoy, taking that ship to the West Coast, and he saw that. So ironic this morning. The next section of the discussion will focus on 2 of the last 6 survivors on the Arizona on December 7th. These heroes are Don Stratton and Lou Contour, and I had the honor of meeting Lou Contour. And by the way, these books are available on Amazon. These are some of the best firsthand accounts that you can imagine about what went on in the Arizona. So I highly recommend them. Time does not permit me to tell Loren Bruner's story, because I said he was the second to the last to leave the ship. And of course, the Arizona and Loren Bruner story are carefully aligned. So let me introduce Don Stratton, gunner's mate, 2nd class, U.S. Navy. He was born on July 14th, 1922 in Innervale, Nebraska, and died on February 15th, 2020. He was the son of a corn husker from Nebraska who lost it all in the Dust Bowl during the Great Depression. As with many of the young men at that time, living in poverty was not unusual. So Don performed many jobs just to survive. And I always get a kick out of when I interview my World War II veterans of what were the living circumstances like? Did you have running water? Did you have indoor plumbing and this and that? And it's very interesting to hear what the responses are. With the prospects of traveling the world and 3 square meals a day, Don Stratton enlisted in the U.S. Navy in May of 1940 at $21 a month. A lot of money in those days. Following basic training at Great Lakes, he was assigned to the Arizona in Bremerton, Washington in October of 1940. Some of his duties were to clean the hull, paint the ship, and holystone the teak decks. Ironically, the Arizona would be repainted 3 times in 1941 for camouflage measures and fleet-wide refits. Ironically, there was paint shortage, so all they did was just cover the existing schemes rather than completely strip it. Very interesting at that time. This is a familiar slide, and Don was designated to the port anti-aircraft director on the sky control platform. So you had the main mast behind them, and then the sky platform where he was. Their job or task was to operate the ship's 5 port-side anti-aircraft guns. By feeding coordinates into the director, the 25-millimeter anti-aircraft guns could fix on any incoming planes. He was about 50 feet above the main deck, and climbing a ladder was the only way to get up there. And again, going back to the 14-inch guns, it would be impossible on the day of this attack to use the 14-inch guns in those 4 turrets, because you had Zeros that were coming along the ocean, along the bay, and then the other bombers were too high up, so the guns were basically ineffective, so they never fired a shot. Unfortunately, the attitude of our military and politicians at the time was of disbelief and underestimation. Cooperation was almost impossible with inter- and intra-service jealousies. In 1932, the Army and Navy conducted joint exercises at Hawaii and at Pearl Harbor, and the outcome was that Pearl Harbor could be bombed by carrier-based planes as early as 1932. In 1937, then Colonel George Patton, who was an Army intelligence officer in Hawaii, concluded that the best way to capture Hawaii was by complete surprise. And then you could also throw Billy Mitchell into the mix, because in 1924 and 25, he advocated that air power was the way to go and not battleships. Premonitions? This FDR appointee, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, had been the publisher of the Chicago Daily News and a World War I veteran. As late as December 4th, 1941, he declared, "Whatever happens, the United States Navy is ready," and it wasn't. As the first wave of Japanese planes arrived at 7:55 a.m. on December 7th, Don Stratton scrambled up the ladder to the director and was strafed by enemy gunfire. The circle indicates where he was at the time of the bomb explosion at turret number 2. You can see the circle in the lower left there. The director became enveloped in flames as his hair, clothes, and skin were scorched. Men collapsed into mounds of flesh. Some sizzled as they mistakenly leaped into the water, coalescing with the burning oil. And you could see how the sky platform was starting to tilt towards the starboard area. In desperation, 6 members of the port director hung on for dear life. Joe George, a bosun's mate on the neighboring repair ship Vestal, heard their cries for help. Ignoring orders to cut the lines between the 2 ships, he attempted to throw a monkey fist, which was a heavy line, 3 times to the Arizona, and finally succeeded on the third attempt. When it was his turn, Don caught the line, tearing off 2 layers of skin. He was now 70 feet across from the Vestal, 45 feet down. He made his way across to the Vestal in extreme pain and torrid heat. And with one last thrust, and you can make it, kid, Don slumped to the deck of the Vestal. Stratton was ultimately transferred to Tripler Naval Hospital, where over 2/3 of his body was burned. Initially, the maggots were used to eat away the dead flesh in triage. And this is a mock-up from his book of how he would have appeared at the time of reporting to Tripler. Stratton was then ultimately moved to Mare Island, which is north of San Francisco, and he would undergo numerous procedures also later in life. Discharged from the Navy in Corona, California in September 1942, he weighed only 92 pounds, and then hitchhiked clear across country to his home in Nebraska on his own dime. After a year at home, he decided to re-enlist in the Navy on February 26, 1944, and again as a gunner's mate. On board the USS Stack, he participated in the largest naval battle in U.S. history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, where we saw the debut of the Japanese kamikazes. Then it was on to Okinawa, surviving a nighttime kamikaze attack directly over his head. Epically, Don Stratton was present in the initial shots of the war at Pearl Harbor and the concluding battle of World War II at Okinawa. Don Stratton, truly a man of legend. Lou Contour was the last living survivor of the USS Arizona, born on September 13th, 1921, and died on April 1st, 2024 at 102 years and 7 months. And this morning, I had the honor, and I texted his daughter and told her that I would be presenting on Lou today, and she texted back saying that she would be, and they live in Grass Valley, where he's buried, and they would be attending their father's grave today on December 7th. Growing up in New Mexico and Colorado, he often carried a rifle to school because of the threat of cougars. He was walking 5 miles one way, 5 miles back, both ways. He too experienced poverty and learned the value of hard work. Employed at Swift & Company, a well-known meatpacking plant in the Denver area, which is still thriving today, he earned 30 cents an hour and roughly $12 a week. Big sums of money. In November of 1939, Lou chose the U.S. Navy over going to college. And in January of 1940, he was assigned to the USS Arizona as an apprentice seaman at turret number 2. Keep that in mind, turret number 2, in the lower powder handling room. In 1941, Lou was promoted to a quartermaster, 3rd class, and became a channel helmsman, steering and navigating the USS Arizona in and out of port. Here he is posing with my original December 8th, 1941 newspaper, which is my dad's, and I found it on the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And it's been signed by over 20 Pearl Harbor survivors. And he has his Pearl Harbor survivor hat. And I was very lucky to spend time with Lou Contour. From this official Navy photograph, Lou indicated where he was when the bomb struck at turret number 2 on December 7th. And if he would have been stationed at his original section, he would have died instantaneously. So if you look aft, where you just see the turret number 2 is submerged in water, that's where he would have been in that powder handling room. Instead, he was at turret number 3, and he was located at the quartermaster's base of the main mast near turret 3. He avoided somewhat imminent danger. Witnessing the hull raise out of the water 30 to 40 feet and the conning tower dropped into the collapsed hull and her forward mast tilted to the starboard side, these images left a lasting impression on Lou Contour. Lieutenant Commander Sam DeFuca, the only living officer at that time on board the Arizona, and the last off the ship and future Medal of Honor recipient, ordered Lou to aid those sailors who were in flames, blinded, and wounded. Also, Lou tried to prevent those panicked crew members from leaping into the burning oil and water into the harbor. Abandoned ship was ordered, and Lou exited to a motor launch and began rescuing distressed seamen from the fiery waters. Yet another courageous act as well. As you can see in this picture here, the Arizona burned for 2.5 days with temperatures near 8,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than ground zero at Hiroshima, which was 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Lou had been assigned to fire control, and when he returned to the ship, remaining victims were burned beyond recognition or were just remnants of white dust. And there was a corpsman by the name of Sterling Cade who passed away last year, and he had the same recollection when he boarded that ship. It was just seeing white dust was the remains of our sailors that would burn that day. It took 5 days for the ship to cool down, and Lou's next assignment was to wear a shallow water dive helmet to search for survivors, records, and bodies in the remnants of the shipwreck. On his first dive, he located 5 corpses in the officers' quarters. After a few days, such efforts were abandoned because of unexploded ammunition, hydrogen sulfide, and jagged edges of the metal hatches of the hull, making it extremely dangerous. In early 1942, he began his flight training in PBYs. These amphib planes were indispensable in the war in the Pacific. They transported men and supplies, they performed anti-sub patrol, they scouted, they rescued, and they bombed select targets. Generally, these were night missions of 14 hours. Lou was assigned to VP-11, the famous Black Cat Squadron, and he would fly over 200 missions in the New Guinea area. He would be shot down twice. In September of 1943, an errant enemy shell penetrated their plane and forced them to an ocean landing. All crew members exited through the pilot's hatch into the water. Sharks surrounded them, but they punched at the fin stalkers and finally made it ashore to be picked up by friendly forces. On a second occasion, a P-40 accidentally mistook his plane for a Japanese one. They were shot down attempting a sea rescue of a desperate B-25 crew. They floated on the ocean, but all survived, saving themselves and the B-25 crew members. In November of 1943, Lou flew his plane up the Sepik River, which was in New Guinea. The diameter of a PBY wing is about 104 feet. There was barely enough room for him to clear the twisting, dangerous jungle waterways. With 5 other crews, they rescued 219 coastal watchers over 3 days, essential to the Allied cause during World War II. Following the Korean War, there were past reports of severe POW incarceration. President Eisenhower ordered Lou to develop the SERE program, saving the lives of those captives in war. We didn't have in World War I, we didn't have in World War II, we didn't have in Korea, but we had them, these regulations by Vietnam. SER means the following: survival, escape, resistance, and evasion. Famous Medal of Honor recipient, naval aviator, and Vietnam POW, James Stockdale, hopefully most of you have heard of him, owed his SERE training for saving his life. So thank you, Lou Contour. So if you read what Lou has, and this is a picture, classic picture taken at the Arizona Memorial. It's very fitting since he is the last survivor. I wish I could say I've taken this picture, but a dear friend of mine took it. And Lou said, their sacrifices on December 7th, 1941 need to be remembered, understood, and honored. And I'm going to say this too, as I just interviewed the last survivor off the USS Nevada, who was at Pearl Harbor that day. And he was in 19 campaigns in the Pacific. As we had the discussion and during the interview and everything, he would always say, I was just following orders. That's all I did. And that's why you're sitting in this audience to remember this day. Lou Contour, also, as a side story, he died on April 1st, 2024, which was my dad's birthday, which is April 1st. And he was buried on April 23rd, 2024. Why is April 23rd special at all? Well, Lou Contour, his dad, and Jack Temple's dad played golf together in the 1940s. Who's Jack Temple? Jack Temple is Shirley Temple's father. And Shirley Temple and Lou Contour were good friends. Well, guess what? I had a prosthodontic specialty practice in Palo Alto. Shirley Temple lived in Woodside, and she became my patient. She was my patient until she passed away. So there was some unique connections there. And to add one other thing, I was anointed by the family to be the family photographer for his celebration of life on April 23rd, 2024. At 4:10 p.m. in the Oval Office on December 8, 1941, FDR signed the Declaration of War. One wonders why the black armband was in place on his left arm. Was it in remorse due to the sinking of the Arizona as part of the Pearl Harbor calamity, since he had witnessed it at the laying of the keel in 1914? No. It was part of his year-long mourning for his deceased mother, as to his legendary speech earlier in the day. Everybody knows this one. The word history was crossed out and infamy inserted as his well-armed presidential vehicle drove to Capitol Hill, and the rest is history. Less than 1% of our nation has ever served in uniform. Our freedom and its joys and blessings is owed to the less than 1%. We are not red states. We are not blue states. We are the United States of America, the greatest nation the world has ever seen. How great are we? 3 of our mortal enemies are now some of our closest allies. Our men and women in uniform defend and take food and sustenance to those victims of oppression and natural disasters. Who does this? The less than 1% who are willing to sacrifice their lives. Who are we? From 13 colonies to 50 states, the United States of America. The stories I just related to you belong to the greatest generation, the greatest inspiration, men of legend. It was an honor and a privilege to be with you on this memorable Pearl Harbor Day, and I'm ever so grateful.